What happens when the life you built is torn down by the man who promised to protect it? For Miranda Pierce, divorce felt like an ending. Her ex-husband, Brendan, made sure she knew it, flaunting his new life, his new money, and his new fiancée's glittering diamond ring in her face at every opportunity. But what he didn't know was that while he was busy showing off a piece of glass, Miranda was quietly building an empire of her own. This isn't just a story about divorce. It's a story about the ultimate comeback, set in the cold, exclusive world of private jets and billionaires, where the biggest twist isn't who has the most money, but whose revenge is served coldest. The air in the private terminal at Teterboro Airport hummed with a unique frequency, a blend of entitlement-refined kerosene and the silent, crisp rustle of money. It was an atmosphere Miranda Pierce had once found intimidating. Now it was merely air. She sat in a plush leather armchair, a stark white column in a sea of charcoal grey and polished chrome, nursing a bottle of sparkling water. Her gaze was fixed on the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sleek, predatory shapes of Gulfstreams and Bombardiers being prepped on the tarmac. Her flight was in 40 minutes. Well, if it isn't Miranda. The voice was a shard of glass in the smooth jazz, playing softly through the lounge's hidden speakers. Miranda didn't need to turn. She had spent 15 years of her life cataloguing every nuance of that voice, its smug condescension, its feigned surprise, its underlying desperate need for an audience. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water before turning her expression a carefully constructed mask of polite neutrality. Brendan Cole stood there looking like a caricature of his own aspirations. His suit was expensive, but it wore him not the other way around. The fabric was a fraction too shiny, the cut a little too aggressive. He'd put on a few pounds around the middle, a soft testament to celebratory client dinners and expensive scotch. Beside him, clinging to his arm like a designer handbag, was Tiffany Maxwell. She was young blonde, and her face was a symphony of expertly applied makeup, designed to look natural. Her eyes, however, darted around the exclusive lounge, drinking in the status of it all, with a thirst that was anything but subtle. Brenda Miranda said, her voice even and cool. "What a surprise, isn't it?" He boomed a little too loudly. A man in a tailored Brioni suit across the lounge glanced up from his Wall Street Journal with a flicker of annoyance before dismissing them. Small world. Headed somewhere fun for the holiday weekend. He was fishing, of course. In their old life, a holiday weekend meant a stressful, budget-conscious trip to the Jersey Shore, an ordeal he'd always complained about. "Just a short trip," Miranda replied, offering no further details. The art of withholding information was a skill she had perfected in the 2 years since their divorce. Tiffany, who had been silent until now, chose this moment to make her move. It was a gesture she had likely practiced in the mirror. She let go of Brendan's arm, only to bring her left hand up to tuck a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. The movement was deliberately slow, designed to catch the light. And catch the light it did. On her ring finger sat a diamond of ostentatious size, a brilliant cut behemoth that screamed rather than whispered its worth. "Brendan, darling, don't bother Miranda." Tiffany cooed her voice, a high, breathy purr. "I'm sure she's just visiting family." The condescension was layered on thick, a cheap perfume of pity. Brendan's grin widened. He wrapped his arm around Tiffany's waist, pulling her close. "We're off to St. Bart's, a little pre-wedding celebration. You know how it is." He looked directly at Miranda, his eyes glinting. "We just got engaged last night. I figured why. Wait. When you know, you know." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air between them. "I never knew with you. This is what real love, real success looks like." Miranda's eyes flickered to the ring. It was a gaudy thing, all flash and no soul, much like the woman wearing it. She thought of the simple, delicate sapphire Brendan had given her when he'd proposed 2 decades ago, a ring she'd cherished, a ring he'd later called a starter piece when his first big commission check had come in. She offered them a small, tight smile. It was the smile of a woman who knew the punchline to a joke they hadn't even heard yet. "Congratulations," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "I wish you all the happiness you deserve." The subtle barb hit its mark. Brendan's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had always hated her precision with words, her ability to wound with a surgeon's scalpel while he bludgeoned with a club. "Yeah, well, things are really looking up," he recovered, puffing out his chest. "The firm made me a junior partner. The money is, well, you wouldn't believe it. Finally getting what I'm worth. We're buying a place in the Hamptons, a real one, not some rental share." He was ticking off his list of achievements, desperate for her to be impressed, to show a flicker of regret, of pain. He needed to see that he had won. Miranda simply nodded, her placid expression giving him nothing. The silence unnerved him. He was used to her reacting, to fighting back, to engaging. This serene detachment was new. It was a language he didn't understand. It was then that a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit approached their small group. He wasn't a flight attendant or airport staff. He carried an aura of quiet authority that was unmistakable. He addressed Miranda directly, his voice a low, respectful baritone. "Ms. Pierce, Mr. Davenport is ready for you. The aircraft is fully prepared for departure to Geneva." Miranda stood smoothing down her simple but elegant linen dress. She gave the man a warm smile. "Thank you, Robert." Brendan and Tiffany froze. The name Davenport echoed in the rarefied air of the terminal. It wasn't just a name, it was a dynasty. The Davenports were old money titans of industry and philanthropy, a name synonymous with global finance and discreet, unimaginable power. They didn't just fly private, they owned the company that built the jets. Brendan stared, his mouth slightly agape. Davenport, as in Nathaniel Davenport, he stammered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. Miranda simply picked up her handbag. She turned to face him one last time. There was no triumph in her eyes, no "I told you so." There was something far more devastating indifference. "It was good to see you, Brendan," she said, and the finality in her tone was absolute. She turned and walked away, following the man named Robert. Brendan and Tiffany stood rooted to the spot, watching as Miranda walked not towards the general boarding door for chartered flights, but directly out onto the tarmac. There, shimmering in the afternoon sun, was not just any private jet. It was a Gulfstream G700, the largest and most luxurious purpose-built private jet in the world. Its tail bore a discreet, elegant crest, the Davenport family insignia. The cabin door was open. Standing at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the opulent interior, was a tall, distinguished man with silvering temples and an easy, confident smile. He wasn't flashy or loud. His power was in his stillness. Nathaniel Davenport extended a hand to Miranda as she reached the top of the stairs. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, a gesture of casual, profound intimacy. From the window of the terminal, Brendan watched the garish diamond on his fiancée's hand, suddenly looking small and pathetic. He saw Miranda turn and give Nathaniel a genuine, radiant smile, a smile he hadn't seen on her face in over a decade. It was the smile of a woman who was not just loved but respected, a woman who was home. As the heavy door of the G700 swung shut with a near-silent hermetic seal, Brendan felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He had spent the last 2 years trying to prove to Miranda and to the world that he had won their divorce. In that single quiet moment as the engines of the jets began to whine, he realized he hadn't just lost. He had been playing an entirely different game, and he had never even known the score. Tiffany tugged on his arm. "Brendan, our flight is boarding. It's just a little charter jet over there." Her voice was laced with a new, whining insecurity. The diamond on her finger no longer felt like a trophy. It felt like a consolation prize. Brendan couldn't speak. He just watched as the Davenport jet taxied gracefully away, a silver shark gliding towards the horizon, taking with it the last vestiges of his hollow victory. 2 years earlier, the air in their Greenwich, Connecticut home had also hummed with a specific frequency, a constant low-grade thrum of anxiety and resentment. Their house, a sprawling colonial they couldn't truly afford, was a stage. Every piece of furniture, every dinner party, every carefully curated school event for their son Leo was a performance for an audience of Brendan's colleagues and their wives. Miranda had been the unpaid, uncredited director of this production. She had given up her promising career in art history and curation to raise Leo, and more pressingly, to manage Brendan's social ascent. Her days were a whirlwind of PTA meetings, charity luncheon planning, and hosting dinners where she would smile serenely as Brendan held court, often retelling her witty observations as his own. The final crack in the foundation appeared on a Tuesday evening over a plate of risotto she had painstakingly stirred for 45 minutes. Leo was at a sleepover, a rare night for just the two of them. "I was talking to Rick Brewster today." Brendan began not looking up from his phone as he shoveled a forkful of rice into his mouth. Rick Brewster was a senior partner at his financial firm, a man whose approval Brendan craved with an almost pathological intensity. "Oh," Miranda asked, pushing an arborio grain around her plate. "How is he?" "His wife. Cynthia just put a down payment on a place in Turks and Caicos. He was showing me pictures. Right on the water." He finally looked up, and his eyes had a hard, accusatory gleam. "Must be nice." Miranda sighed, the familiar weight settling in her chest. "Brendan, we can't afford a vacation home. We're still paying off the loan we took for the country club membership. A membership he had insisted they needed for networking, but which mostly resulted in him playing golf 3 times a week while their credit card debt ballooned. That's the problem, Mira. You always think in terms of can't. You don't see the big picture." He put his phone down with a thud. "It's an investment. It's about perception. You have to spend money to make money. How do you not understand that after all these years, I understand that we have a mortgage, a car payment and tuition for Leo's private school?" She countered, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand that your base salary covers our expenses, and we're living off the hope of a bonus that might not materialize. The big picture, you see, is a fantasy built on debt." He scoffed, a nasty, dismissive sound. "You're so dramatic. My bonus is going to be huge this year. The Sentinel deal is practically in the bag." The Sentinel deal. He'd been talking about it for months. A complex, borderline hostile acquisition of a smaller, family-run tech company. Brendan's role was small, but he spoke of it as if he were orchestrating the entire affair. "And what if it's not huge? What if the deal falls through?" she pressed. "We have no safety net, Brendan. You cashed out the retirement fund I had from the museum to cover the down payment on this house. That was a low blow, and they both knew it. The small nest egg from her pre-Brendan life gone." He flinched as if struck. "Don't you dare bring that up," he hissed, his face flushing with anger. "That was a mutual decision. It was for us, for our family. To give our son a better life than the one you had with your dusty books and your academic parents who thought a tenured position was the height of ambition." The cruelty of the jab stole her breath. She had loved her parents. She had loved their quiet intellectual life, a life rich in culture and ideas, if not in cash. "My parents were happy," she whispered. "They were content." He sneered. "Contentment is for losers, Mira. It's a consolation prize for people who are too scared to want more. I want more. I deserve more." And frankly, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous level. "You're an anchor. Your constant worrying, your small-minded budgeting. You're holding me back. An anchor." The word echoed in the cavernous dining room. That's what she was to him. Not a partner, not a support system. A dead weight. In that moment, 15 years of suppressed doubts, of swallowed Insults of quiet sacrifices coalesced into a single cold point of clarity. It wasn't just a fight about money. It was a fundamental schism in their values, in their very souls. He didn't see her. He saw a line item on his balance sheet, a liability in his grand plan for success. She stood up her chair, scraping against the hardwood floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. All the emotion had drained out of her, replaced by an arctic calm. "I want a divorce, Brendan." He stared at her, genuinely shocked. He had expected tears, arguments, a dramatic storming off to the bedroom that would be resolved with a grudging apology from him in the morning. He had not expected this. "What? Don't be ridiculous. You're just upset." "No," she said, her voice like chipping ice. "I'm done. I am done being the set dressing for your life. I am done being your anchor." His shock quickly morphed into rage, the defensive anger of a man whose ego had been mortally wounded. "Fine. You want a divorce, you'll get one, but don't come crying to me when you realize what you've thrown away. You have no idea how to survive in the real world. You've been living off my hard work for 15 years. What are you going to do? Go back to dusting off old pots for a living?" The divorce was as brutal as he had promised. His lawyers, paid for by the firm, were sharks. They painted her as a spendthrift housewife with no marketable skills, demanding an exorbitant alimony that he claimed would bankrupt him. He hid assets, lied about his projected bonus, and fought her on every single point, from the custody arrangement for Leo to who got the wedding china. He'd met Tiffany, a paralegal at the law firm, representing him within weeks. Their affair was a poorly kept secret, another tool to humiliate Miranda. He moved out and immediately began living the life he'd always wanted, unburdened by Miranda's fiscal prudence. He bought a new Porsche. He took Tiffany on lavish trips, posting every moment on social media, tagging friends he knew would report back to Miranda. Miranda, in the end, walked away with the house, which she immediately knew she had to sell a modest alimony settlement that would barely cover the mortgage for a year and primary custody of Leo. Brendan had fought for 50-50 custody for financial reasons to lower his child support payments, but when it became clear it would interfere with his golf games and spontaneous trips, he relented. Selling the house, the grand stage of her former life, was the most liberating experience of her life. She stood in the empty rooms, the echoes of their arguments finally silenced, and felt not loss, but potential. She took the proceeds, paid off the last of their shared debts, and put the rest into a small, rented townhouse in a less fashionable but more welcoming town nearby. It was a fraction of the size, but it was hers. She found a job within 3 months, not dusting old pots, but at a high-end art advisory firm in Manhattan. The owner, a shrewd woman named Eleanor Vance, had been a colleague of Miranda's old professor. She was hired on a probationary basis, her 15-year gap in employment a glaring red flag. But Miranda wasn't the same woman who had left the workforce. The divorce had forged a core of steel within her. She worked relentlessly, not with the frantic energy of her ex-husband, but with a quiet, focused intensity. Her knowledge, long dormant, came flooding back. She had a natural eye, an innate understanding, not just of art, but of the people who collected it. She didn't just sell paintings, she built collections. She understood the psychology of her clients, their passions, their insecurities. She was good, frighteningly good. Within a year, she was no longer on probation. She was Eleanor's most trusted advisor, handling the firm's most important clients. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving quietly and on her own terms, far from the glare of Brendan's manufactured success. She was building a new life, not on a foundation of debt and perception, but on the solid bedrock of her own talent and hard work. The first 6 months after the divorce were a study in shades of grey. After selling the grand hollow stage of her marriage in Greenwich, Miranda moved with her son Leo into a modest but light-filled townhouse. The silence in the evenings after Leo was asleep was the loudest thing she had ever heard. It was a vacuum threatening to pull her down into a vortex of what-ifs and regrets. Some nights, she would sit in the dark, nursing a cup of tea and allow the fear to wash over her. The fear of failure, of loneliness, of proving Brendan right, that she couldn't survive without him. But with the dawn, a new steely resolve would settle in. She was not the fragile woman Brendan had painted her to be. She was the manager, the director, the quiet force who had held their chaotic world together for 15 years. Now, she would direct that force inward. Her re-entry into the workforce was humbling. With a 15-year gap on her resume, most elite firms wouldn't even grant her an interview. But a letter to her old mentor at Columbia University led to a single opportunity: a probationary role at Vance Art Advisory, a boutique firm run by the formidable Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, a woman with eyes that could appraise a soul as easily as a Monet, made her position clear. Your academic background is impeccable, Miranda, but the art world has changed. It's faster, more brutal. You'll have to prove that you haven't gone soft. The first few weeks were excruciating. Younger, sharper associates circled her like sharks, speaking in a rapid-fire shorthand of auction results and market trends she struggled to catch up on. They saw her as a relic, a divorcee darling who'd gotten the job through a connection. Miranda ignored them. She arrived early, stayed late, and immersed herself in the work. She devoured art journals, rebuilt her network, and spent her weekends dragging Leo through galleries and museums, reigniting a passion that had long been dormant. Her breakthrough came with a notoriously difficult client, a tech mogul, who collected with his ego rather than his eyes. The younger associates had tried to push flashy flavor-of-the-month pieces on him, and he'd rejected them all. Miranda did her research. She read his interviews, studied his company's design philosophy, and understood that beneath the bravado was a man obsessed with legacy and structure. Instead of showing him what was popular, she presented him with a collection of early 20th century constructivist works, bold, architectural, and intellectually rigorous. The mogul was flawed. "You're the first person who hasn't tried to sell me a painting," he'd said, studying a complex Lisitsky print. "You've sold me an idea." He bought the entire collection. Eleanor Vance had summoned Miranda to her office that evening, a rare smile gracing her lips. "You haven't gone soft, Pierce," she'd said. "You've marinated." From that day on, Miranda was no longer a probationer. She was Eleanor's most trusted advisor. Her life found a new rhythm, one of her own making. It was a delicate but deeply rewarding balance of managing Leo's schedules, excelling at a career she loved, and rediscovering the quiet joy of her own company. Men were a complication she had no interest in. The wounds from her marriage were still too fresh. She met Nathaniel Davenport on a rainy Thursday in October, a full year after her triumphant sale. She wasn't looking to meet anyone. She was working. The setting was a small, brutally exclusive gallery in Chelsea, holding a private preview of post-war German art. Miranda was there to assess a massive Anselm Kiefer piece for a client's collection. She stood before the colossal canvas, a universe of cracked earth lead and straw. It was an intimidating, almost violent piece, and she was completely lost in it, trying to decipher its melancholic poetry. The straw is both the harvest and the ashes, the promise of life and the memory of destruction. Kiefer is a master of duality, isn't he? The voice, a low and resonant baritone, emerged from right beside her. It was so unexpected that she startled slightly. Most people at these events spoke in hushed, reverent tones or loud, boorish boasts. This voice was simply conversational, an offering of shared thought. She turned. The man was tall, dressed in a simple dark grey cashmere sweater and impeccably tailored trousers. There was no ostentation about him, but he possessed a stillness, a self-contained confidence that was more commanding than any designer logo. His eyes, a deep, intelligent blue, were fixed on the painting, not on her, sharing her perspective. "Most people just see the grit," Miranda replied, her voice regaining its professional poise. "They see the mess and the scale. They miss the poetry." Most people aren't looking, he said, finally turning his gaze from the canvas to her. A faint, appreciative smile touched his lips. He saw her not just as a woman in a gallery, but as a fellow observer. He extended a hand. Nathaniel, I apologize for interrupting your thoughts. Miranda, she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm, a brief point of contact that felt surprisingly steadying. And there's nothing to apologize for. It's refreshing to hear someone talk about Kiefer's substance instead of his investment potential. I find that the best investments are always in substance, he replied, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. They talked for nearly an hour, a conversation that flowed as effortlessly as water. They moved from the somber weight of Kiefer to the ghostly photorealism of Gerhard Richter, then to the rebellious chaos of Georg Baselitz. It wasn't a flirtation, it was a thrilling meeting of minds. He was whip-smart, his knowledge of art history as deep and nuanced as her own. He didn't lecture, he inquired. He didn't challenge her to be contrarian, he built upon her insights with his own. For the first time since her university days, she felt the exhilarating spark of intellectual kinship. He never once mentioned his last name or what he did, and she found herself not caring. He was just Nathaniel, a fascinating man who spoke her language. As the gallery staff began to discreetly signal the end of the private viewing, he turned to her. I have an extra ticket to the Philharmonic tonight. A last-minute cancellation by a colleague. They're playing Mahler's Fifth. I know it's terribly forward, but on the off chance you're free, would you be interested in joining me? Her automatic defense mechanism screamed, no. A man she'd just met. A date. She wasn't ready, but then she considered the invitation. It didn't feel like a line. It felt like a continuation of their conversation, from one art form to another. It was an invitation to share an experience not to be won over. I'd love that she heard herself say, a surprising thrill running through her. That evening, as a taxi dropped them in front of Lincoln Center, the truth of his identity was revealed not by words, but by deference. The moment he stepped onto the curb, ushers and managers materialized their greetings, laced with a specific, profound respect. Mr. Davenport, good to see you, sir. Your box is ready. A flicker of pure intimidation ran through Miranda as she followed him up the grand staircase. Davenport. It wasn't just a name, it was an institution. But as they settled into the plush velvet chairs of the best box in the house, he turned to her, a look of apology in his eyes. I should have mentioned my family name, he said quietly. I apologize if it makes things awkward. I find it often gets in the way of a real conversation. In that moment, her intimidation melted away, replaced by a deep sense of respect. He hadn't led with his name, his power, or his wealth. He had led with himself. Their relationship unfolded like a slow, deliberate sonata. It was built on a foundation of shared passions and quiet moments. There were long, snowy walks through the Met, ending in the tranquil sculpture garden. There were dinners in small, unpretentious restaurants in the village, where they would talk for hours, losing all track of time. He listened, truly listened when she spoke of Leo, asking thoughtful questions about his interests and his personality. When he finally met him, he didn't try to impress him with gifts. He talked to him about his favorite video games and a new science exhibit, treating him not as a child, but as a young man worthy of respect. Nathaniel was the antithesis of Brendan in every conceivable way. Where Brendan was a frantic broadcast, Nathaniel was a quiet, absorbing novel. About 6 months into their relationship, the conversation that would change everything happened. They were in the library of his sprawling Fifth Avenue apartment, a room that felt more like a sanctuary than a showpiece. The walls were lined floor to ceiling, with books interspersed with a few carefully chosen, deeply personal pieces of art. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, casting a warm glow on the room. They were discussing the work of the Davenport Family Foundation, its focus on environmental science and ethical technology. It's a constant battle, Nathaniel said, swirling a vintage burgundy in his glass. For every project we fund that aims to do good, there's a corporate entity out there looking to exploit a loophole or cut a corner for profit. Perception becomes more important than reality. The phrase struck a chord in Miranda. Perception was everything to my ex-husband, she said, her voice softer than she intended. She rarely spoke of Brendan, reluctant to taint this new clean part of her life with the mess of her past. He valued perception above all else. His last big obsession before I left was some acquisition his firm was working on. He was convinced it was his ticket to the major leagues. The Sentinel deal, he called it. At the mention of the name, Miranda saw a subtle but distinct change in Nathaniel. It was almost imperceptible, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a sudden stillness in his hand, the blue of his eyes sharpening and going cold. The warmth from the fire seemed to recede. Sentinel Innovations. He asked, his voice carefully, dangerously neutral. Yes, that's the one, she confirmed, a sense of unease creeping over her. A smaller tech company, I think. Brendan said his firm was going to swallow it whole. I remember he was working insane hours. He was different, harder. I always felt a bit sorry for the family that owned it. Nathaniel placed his glass down on a leather coaster with exacting precision. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. When he spoke, his voice was low and hard, stripped of its earlier warmth. I knew the family who owned it. The Pattersons. A good family. Decent people. Howard Patterson was a brilliant engineer. Their technology was revolutionary, an AI-driven predictive system for early warnings of natural disasters. It was designed to save thousands of lives. What happened? Miranda asked, her own glass frozen halfway to her lips. Nathaniel's cold, furious gaze finally met hers. They were targeted by a firm of corporate raiders masquerading as a legitimate investment bank. A firm called Northgate Financial. Miranda's blood ran cold. Northgate Financial, Brendan's firm. They used predatory tactics. Nathaniel continued, his voice a low, controlled fury. They initiated a smear campaign, planting false rumors of financial instability to drive down Sentinel's stock price. Then they launched a hostile takeover bid. Our investigation later found they had bribed a junior board member to get access to proprietary research. It was a classic smash-and-grab operation. Their goal was to acquire Sentinel, strip it for its patents, sell them off to the highest bidders, and dissolve the company, destroying Howard's life's work and its humanitarian mission in the process. He paused, taking a deep, ragged breath. The Davenport Foundation was a major silent investor in Sentinel. We believed in Howard's work. When Northgate made their move, we fought back. It was a long, ugly, brutal battle. We poured resources into a counter-offensive, exposing their tactics to the financial press. In the end, we managed to fend them off, but the cost was immense. The stress gave Howard Patterson a massive heart attack. He survived. Nathaniel's voice cracked slightly, but he was never the same. Miranda sat in stunned, horrified silence, the room tilting around her. Brendan's rants about weak management at Sentinel, his triumphant talk of bleeding them, his utter lack of empathy, it all replayed in her mind, now cast in a sickening new light. He hadn't just been ambitious, he had been cruel. He had been a villain in a story she never knew existed. The SEC investigated Northgate afterward. Nathaniel said, his voice softening as he saw the profound shock on her face. They found extensive evidence of insider trading and market manipulation. Several senior partners were forced out, though they avoided criminal charges by paying fines that were for them a pittance. He reached across the small table between them and took her cold hand in his. Miranda, your ex-husband's name was on many of the internal documents our legal team uncovered during discovery. He wasn't a senior player, but he was complicit. He helped draft the press releases full of lies. He was one of the architects of the smear campaign against the Pattersons. She looked at Nathaniel, at his kind, steady eyes, now filled with a shared, somber understanding. The cosmic irony of it all was overwhelming. She had unknowingly fled a man who was an active participant in the destruction of something her new partner had fought so hard to protect. She hadn't just stumbled into a better life. She had crossed a moral battlefield and ended up on the right side. He told me, she said, her voice a raw whisper, the memory of that final, venomous argument hitting her with the force of a physical blow, that I was an anchor. He said I was holding him back. Nathaniel's grip on her hand tightened. He looked at her, his expression one of infinite tenderness and fierce conviction. "No, Miranda," he said, his voice resolute and clear. "You were the only thing holding him up." The assent was imperceptible, a smooth and silent defiance of gravity. One moment, the grey industrial landscape of northern New Jersey was a map below them. The next, they had pierced the cloud layer and emerged into a realm of blinding white and brilliant blue. The hum of the Gulf Stream's twin Rolls-Royce engines was a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated not through the cabin, but through the very air itself, a sound of pure, unadulterated power. Inside the cabin, the world was a sanctuary of serene luxury. Cream-colored leather, so soft it seemed to breathe, contrasted with the dark, mirror-like polish of burled walnut trim. Fittings of brushed platinum caught the sunlight that streamed unfiltered by smog or haze through the large oval windows. A cabin attendant, whose movements were a study in unobtrusive grace, had served them glasses of Krug champagne in delicate flutes and a small platter of hors d'oeuvres before retreating to the forward galley, leaving them in absolute privacy. Miranda stared out the window at the impossible curve of the earth, a thin, ethereal line separating the deep cobalt of the stratosphere from the blackness beyond. The encounter in the terminal felt a world away, a scene from a poorly written play she had been forced to watch. She replayed it in her mind, the shiny suit, Tiffany's desperate grip on Brendan's arm, the almost comically oversized ring. She had expected to feel a surge of triumph, a bitter satisfaction. Instead, she felt a profound and tranquil emptiness. The anger, the hurt, the resentment that had been her companions for so long had simply evaporated. There was nothing left to feel for him. "A silver penny for your thoughts." Nathaniel's voice, low and gentle, broke her reverie. He was in the seat opposite her, his long legs crossed comfortably, watching her with an expression of patient understanding. She turned to him, a real smile finally blooming on her face, reaching her eyes and making them shine. "They're not worth that much," she said. "I was just thinking how, clarifying that was." He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Nathaniel observed, taking a small sip of his champagne. "Worse," Miranda corrected softly. "He saw a future he can't be part of, and he realized he was still stuck in the past. He has no idea, does he? About the real story?" "None." Nathaniel confirmed. "He doesn't know about my family's connection to Sentinel Innovations. He doesn't know that I've seen the evidence of what his firm did. To him, my name is just a symbol of a level of wealth he dreams of. He thinks this is just a cruel twist of fate, a cosmic joke. He thinks you won the lottery. What he doesn't understand," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping with an intensity that made her heart stir, "is that you are the lottery." The sincerity of the words, the simple, unadorned truth of them in his eyes was a balm. Still, the pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture that was both tragic and pathetic. His junior partnership, she mused aloud, swirling the golden bubbles in her glass. It never sounded right. He was so proud of it, but the way he described the new firm, it felt different from Northgate, less established. Nathaniel nodded grimly. It was a significant step down. After the Sentinel scandal, Northgate Financial was radioactive. The SEC investigation gutted their senior leadership, and their reputation was left in tatters. Any associate with a Northgate affiliation on their resume, especially one involved in that specific time frame, was tainted. Brendan's move to Westlake Capital wasn't a promotion. It was a scramble for a lifeboat, and he's trying to paint it like a yacht, Miranda murmured, the metaphor landing with perfect clarity. An apt one, Nathaniel agreed. Westlake is a vulture fund. They thrive on the kind of high-risk, ethically ambiguous deals that established firms won't touch. It's a place for financial cowboys, not long-term strategists. And it's taking a toll on him. From what my sources in the financial world tell me, his personal life is a house of cards. He paused, as if weighing whether to continue. The Hamptons house he bragged about. It's a fractional ownership property. He owns a 4-week share along with 7 other families. The Porsche is a 2-year lease, one he can barely afford. His credit is stretched to its absolute limit, all to maintain this facade of wild success. Miranda pictured it Brendan, waking up every day and putting on the costume of the man he desperately wanted to be, the weight of the lies pressing down on him. A wave of something not pity, but a detached, clinical sadness washed over her. It was for the man he used to be, 20 years ago, before the hunger for more had consumed everything good inside him. And the ring, she asked, her voice quiet. She almost didn't want to know, yet she had to. That ring was the centerpiece of his performance, the ultimate symbol of his supposed victory, the one he was so proud of. Nathaniel set his champagne flute down on the polished walnut console between them. His expression was serious, almost reluctant. "I hope you don't think me presumptuous, Miranda. But when he was brandishing it, trying so deliberately to cause you pain, I took a photo. It was discreet with my phone's camera zoomed in. I sent it to an old friend, a man who runs the acquisitions department for a world-renowned jeweler. He can spot a diamond's worth from a mile away." "Nathaniel, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Because he used that object as a weapon against you. You deserve to know if the weapon was even real." He took a breath. "It's a lab-grown diamond. A decent size, but its clarity is heavily flawed, full of inclusions. My friend said it's the kind of stone you buy from an online retailer that advertises heavily on social media. It has been set in an oversized, flashy platinum mount to maximize its perceived size and hide its imperfections. In reality," he concluded, his gaze steady on hers, "its market value is less than the watch you're wearing." Miranda instinctively looked down at the simple, elegant Cartier tank watch on her wrist, a gift from Nathaniel for her birthday. It was a masterpiece of understated design, its value lying in its history, its craftsmanship, its quiet confidence. It didn't scream for attention. It simply was. The irony was staggering. Brendan, in his most audacious attempt to showcase his superior wealth and status, had brandished a fake. He had built his triumphant moment upon a lie, a piece of flawed, manufactured glass. A memory surfaced sharp and painful of Brendan years ago, looking at the small, delicate sapphire ring he'd given her. "It's a starter piece, Mira," he'd said dismissively. "One day, I'll get you a real rock." He had finally gotten his real rock, and it was as hollow as his promises. So the whole thing was a performance. She breathed the full weight of it landing on her. All of it. A lie. "Every last bit," Nathaniel confirmed softly. "He saw you in that terminal. You were calm, elegant, and completely self-possessed. You weren't looking for him. You weren't miserable. And it drove him mad. His insecurity went into overdrive, and he had to stage that little scene. He needed to re-establish what he perceives as his dominance, to prove to you, to Tiffany, and most of all to himself, that he was the winner." Miranda leaned her head back against the supple leather, closing her eyes. The picture was complete, stark, and devastating in its clarity. This was not a story of her ex-husband's triumph. It was the story of a man in a tailspin, accelerating his descent with every lie, while she had been quietly, painstakingly climbing her way back into the light. "You know," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as she opened her eyes to look at him. "For the longest time, especially during the divorce, I tortured myself. I wondered if he was right. If I really was an anchor, if my caution, my desire for a financial safety net, my small-mindedness, as he called it, had truly held him back from some kind of greatness." Nathaniel's expression softened, but his eyes held a core of steel. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Greatness. He scoffed the word an offense on her behalf. There is nothing great about destroying a good company for profit, Miranda. There is nothing great about lying to your partner or building a life on a foundation of deception. The very qualities he called your flaws, your prudence, your integrity, your loyalty, are your greatest strengths. They are the bedrock of your character. They are the reason I fell in love with you. The words spoken so plainly and with such unwavering conviction, high above the clouds, were the final healing balm on a wound she hadn't realized still ached. They stitched together the last torn pieces of her past. She reached across the aisle and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. His grip was warm and strong, an anchor of a different kind. A safe harbor. He thought he was flying to St. Bart's, she said, a sense of finality in her voice. But he's been in purgatory all this time and he doesn't even know it. And where are we flying? Nathaniel asked, a genuine smile lighting up his face. To Geneva, she said, her own voice suddenly feeling light and free, for the world's most prestigious art fair. And after that, who knows I do, he said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles, a gesture that was both courtly and deeply intimate. After Geneva, we're flying to Lake Como. I've rented a small private villa on the water for a week. No meetings, no phone calls, just you and me. Leo flies in to meet us on Sunday after his school trip. We'll eat pasta and drink wine and talk about art and philosophy and the future. He held her gaze, his blue eyes full of promise. A place where we can be content. Content. The word that Brendan had once hurled at her like an insult, a synonym for failure and lack of ambition. In Nathaniel's mouth, it sounded like the most beautiful, most precious gift in the world. As the Gulf Stream G700 banked gently towards the east, a silver arrow flying true into the rising sun, Miranda Pierce knew she was no longer escaping a past. She was flying towards a future she had earned. Brendan hadn't just lost their private war. He had become a footnote in a story that was now finally all hers. In the final analysis, the story of Miranda Pierce and Brendan Cole is not a fairy tale. It is not a simple tale of a woman being rescued from obscurity by a wealthy prince. To see it that way is to miss the profound and vital lesson at its heart. This is a story about two different kinds of wealth, two different definitions of success, and the vast, unbridgeable chasm that lies between them. It is a stark reminder that a life's value is not measured by its price tag, but by its substance. Brendan Cole lived within the hollow architecture of a life built for show. He understood the language of brand names, stock prices, and carrot sizes, but he was utterly illiterate in the language of the human heart. His triumph was a performance, his assets were liabilities in disguise, and his grandest romantic gesture, a flawed, lab-grown diamond, was the perfect metaphor for his entire existence. Something that glittered aggressively from a distance, but revealed itself to be hollow and imperfect upon closer inspection. He wasn't living a life. He was curating a feed, trapped in a gilded prison of his own making, forever chasing a horizon of validation that would always recede as he approached. Miranda's victory, therefore, was not won in the hushed, exclusive air of the Teterboro terminal. It was not the moment she boarded the Gulfstream jet. That was merely the epilogue. Her true victory was forged in silence and solitude, in the quiet, lonely nights in her small townhouse when she chose resolve over regret. It was earned with every early morning she spent studying every condescending glance she endured from younger colleagues and every ounce of courage it took to reclaim a career and an identity that her husband had tried to convince her was worthless. Nathaniel Davenport was not her rescuer. He was her equal. He was a consequence of her growth, not the cause of it. She attracted a man of substance because she had first painstakingly rebuilt herself into a woman of substance. The quiet confidence, the intellectual curiosity, and the unshakable integrity he fell in love with were the very things she had rediscovered and nurtured on her own. The airport scene was not an act of revenge. It was simply the universe holding up a mirror, showing her a stunning reflection of the internal reality she had already built. It was the quiet, definitive closing of a door on a past she had long since outgrown. If Miranda's journey of quiet resilience and her ultimate vindication resonates with the part of you that knows true worth, has nothing to do with noise or flash, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us to continue creating and sharing powerful stories like this one. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that their value is inherent and not dependent on anyone else's approval. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss a story of drama integrity and the quiet, unshakable power of living an authentic life. Thank you for listening.